welcome to another episode of the Iraqi Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Juma Iraqi. Before we start today's episode, I just want to mention that this podcast is available on YouTube, but you can also find it on Stitcher, iTunes, and SoundCloud as well. So today's guest is a really special guest. I've been actually trying to get him on for several years now, and finally we found the time to do this podcast. So today's guest is Dr. Layne Norton, also known as BioLayne. Layne, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. And the only reason I didn't come on was because I just didn't like you.
Yeah.
So, no, it's just, I think we just, had some times that didn't line up, and you're busy and I'm busy, and it's tough to get schedules on task. But I've wanted to do the podcast because I've seen that you've had some really good people on, very knowledgeable. And obviously, if, Eric Helms is the one who made the introduction, and if he thinks highly of you, then I'm sure you're a great, you'll have some great discussion, and we'll have a great chat.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words, and I also, like I said, appreciate you being here today. So before we dive into the questions and today's topic, could you give our listeners a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, I would say I'm a meathead who likes science. So I still try to figure out if I'm a science geek who likes to lift weights, or if I'm more of a meathead who likes science. I think it's a meathead who likes science. So I got into bodybuilding when I was a teenager because I got picked on and didn't get really any attention from girls. So I started lifting weights to try to correct that. It did not help with either of those things, but I fell in love with the process of lifting weights and, kind of made, I guess, a career out of it as much as you can without being, Mr. Olympia. So I was successful in natural bodybuilding, pretty successful in powerlifting. And then along the way, did a bachelor's in biochemistry and a PhD in nutritional sciences. And then ended up doing a lot of coaching. So I've coached over 1,700 people over the last 14 years. And I guess I've done a little bit of everything. And I love this stuff. I love nutrition, and I love, I guess more broad than that, I love metabolism, and I love the human body. I think just the understanding how things work is just an amazing thing. I love it. I was actually, my video guy was warming up something in the microwave today, and he put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in for like 3 minutes. And I'm like, what are you doing? That's way too long. He's like, oh, well, some of these other meals take 3 minutes to heat up. I'm like, actually, I can tell you why that is, because the microwave only really warms up fluid and fats. And so something that's really dense in fat is going to heat up faster. You only need about 20 seconds. And he's like, man, I'm like, I don't know, dude. There's a lot of stuff rattling around up there, but I just love learning about how things work. I think it's the coolest thing.
Excellent. You have a very impressive resume. And from my understanding, you were one of the first people that actually started with the online coaching. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the first person I knew that was doing it was Dr. Joe Klimzetsky, who actually was my first coach. And I would say, hopefully I'm not out on a limb here, but I would say that I kind of popularized it, that a lot of people I worked with ended up going on becoming coaches themselves. I mean, Eric was one of those people, Alberto Nunez. My mind is blanking, Paul Ravella. Like, I could go down a list of the people I worked with who ended up, going on and doing their own coaching. And that's cool. It's interesting because when I first started back in 2004, 2005 doing this, the problem was trying to convince people that, hey, I can do this over the internet. I don't need this. I don't need to watch you eat. You know what I mean? Like, I can do this without being in person. And now you have no issue with that at all. It's more about the fact that anyone who's got a decent Instagram following and can flash an ab shot can call themselves a coach. But to be fair, I think things are better now than they were. I don't think I'm a cynic. I think they're better now than they were because people did the same thing back in the day. I mean, you had every bro at the gym who was a coach, but they just didn't do it online. It was just everybody in that area. But if you wanted to get ready for a bodybuilding show, you just went to the big jack bro in the gym. You know what I mean? So it really hasn't changed that much. But now that you do have, back in the day, you just didn't have a good option, honestly, for getting ready or you could go to a dietitian, but there was really I would say there was really very few body composition experts like there are now. Like now you have a plethora to choose from of people who are really well qualified and are very good coaches. And so if you hire a bad one now, you're kind of an idiot. I mean, to be honest with you, or you didn't really do your background research on people, because I mean, you've got people like, even within the evidence-based community, there's all kinds of price ranges and availability. So like, even if you're not going to hire, like, say, me, I mean, you can always go hire an Eric Helms, or you can hire an Alberto, you can hire any number of people who have really good backgrounds in this stuff, Mike Israetel, those sorts of things. So to James Krieger is another one. To make the conscious effort to just hire a bro is pretty inexcusable at this point, I think. So it is good. It is better now. I think we have a lot of options. Back in the day, people just didn't even have any options.
Absolutely. And I think the difference now is also, it seems that people are more interested in actually getting academic degrees as well in
Yes.
this field. So we have much more people that have done master's degrees and PhDs who are also coaching. So I think that's also a positive difference. But I think the biggest problem today is we have so much accessibility to knowledge, and some people feel that it's difficult to navigate through everything. And we as we who try to be evidence-based and try to spread information, we might feel that we're not heard as much as the other noise that's coming from this, because people are more interested, in my opinion, about hearing these super fad diets, and they're not really interested in learning the basics and how to apply them and basically be patient and see results over time.
Yeah, I actually just put up sorry, I went downstairs because my connection was a little bit slow, so I went down here because it's a little bit better.
Yeah,
I actually put up a meme that we did for my Instagram. I don't know if you've seen the meme where it's the guy walking with his girlfriend, but he's like looking back at another girl.
Yeah.
And then people put in their own little things. And so for me, the girlfriend is like, it's like the guy is 95% of dieters. Mm-hmm. The girlfriend who he's looking away from is caloric restriction, consistency, hard work, exercise. And the girl he's looking at is fad diets, waist trainers, and other fuckery is what we had on there. So it got a lot of engagement, actually. But it is very true. Like, I think when anybody gets into anything, whatever hobby or area you're in, I think the natural inclination is to seek the simple answer first, right? To not worry about nuance so much. So the first thing you do is, it's like, I'm into fishing and shooting, like competitive target shooting. And, the first thing, what's the best handgun? Well, if you ask that question to an expert, somebody who's actually like been in the field and used a lot of different weapon systems, the first thing they say is, what are you going to use it for? Mm-hmm. And then they're going to ask you a bunch of other questions, right? And then they'll go, well, this one might be better for this thing, but this thing is better in this thing, and it really depends on your personal preference. Nutrition is no different, and any other thing is no different. Same thing with fishing. I can say something, hey, what's the best way to catch kingfish? And if I'm just listening to a broad answer, some guy's going to say slow trolling, and another guy's going to say live chumming, and another guy's going to say another way. And the reality is probably all those methods work, but it depends on the conditions, the boat you're in, all this kind of stuff. And nutrition is the same way. For somebody just to say, and just because this is what's popular right now, well, keto, low carb is what you should do. Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, some people, like, they seem to respond really well to that, and it fits their lifestyle really well, and they can maintain it. And hey, those are all great reasons. But it's like when I was on the Rogan podcast, I'm like, you can't really sit there and tell me it's better because the data says it's not. I'm sorry. Like I tell people, you've got guys out here like Thomas DeLauer on YouTube or whatever who are saying, oh, we'll just cut out these 5 foods that kill testosterone or just eat these superfoods or whatever. And I tell people, I'm like, you realize that like I went to do a PhD trying to find magic foods. Mm-hmm. Like if I found magic foods, I would be rich right now. You and I wouldn't be talking because I would be out on a 200-foot yacht in the middle of the Mediterranean with like 10 bikini models on either side of me fanning me and feeding me grapes because I'd be that rich if I discovered magic foods. They don't exist, right? There's no such thing. Certain foods have certain qualities. Certain diets have certain qualities. What is going to make a difference or be best for the individual will depend on numerous factors. And just to paint everything with a broad brush, it's just, yeah, it's very short-sighted and quite frankly stupid. And I tell people, if you want to know if somebody's an expert, see how much context and nuance they give when they answer your question. If somebody answers very simply, usually not an expert, or they say things like always, never, best, worst. That's usually a really good way to find out if somebody's, you ask Eric Helms a question, Eric is going to give you a ton of context and nuance, and he's probably going to have a very tempered, measured answer, right? It's not going to be, yeah, bro, do this.
Yeah.
So that's really tough because that's always what people seek because we want a simple answer because it satisfies us much better. It's easier to digest for us, but it's usually not the case. And I always use financial comparisons as well. It'd be like going to a financial advisor and saying, hey, what's the best investment? What stock should I invest in? Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, they're not, if most are going to go, how much money do you have to invest? When do you want to retire? Let's look at what the market is doing right now. How much risk are you willing to assume? Like, there's so much stuff that goes into actually figuring out what is right for you that anybody who's giving you a simple answer is they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you so much for that input. Now, let's dive into the questions. So today's topic is why diets fail. And let's start with a basic question. Like, you often hear that people say that we have a weight loss problem. But do we really actually have a weight loss problem?
Oh, you're just like softballing me right into my wheelhouse right here. No, the data says we actually don't. 6 out of every 7 overweight or obese people will lose a significant amount of body weight in their lifetime. And by significant, I mean more than 10%. The problem is diets have an unbelievably terrible recidivism rate. There was actually an article that was published, and I think it was AJCN a few years ago, and I think the title was "The Mediocre Results of Dieting," and their conclusion was that they could not, based on the scientific data, they could not recommend dieting as a viable long-term weight loss solution because they were looking at more than 3-year data. Mm-hmm. And if you look at more than 3-year data, it's like 85, depending on what you use as your marker of keeping it off, right? So some studies will say, well, if you lost 10% and kept at least 50% of what you lost off, we consider that weight maintenance. But if you look at, okay, losing at least like 15% and keeping it all off, it's like over 95% failure rate. Like, it's horrendous. So, my thing is, why are we so like the weight loss thing isn't a problem. We figured it out. You can do a bunch of different things to lose weight. We need to figure out how to maintain it. And the best paper I ever read on this was by a guy from the University of Denver named McLean. He wrote this like 50-page review that was unbelievable. It was called Biology's Response to Dieting, the Impetus for Weight Regain. And there was a line in there that really stood out to me and made me really, it changed the way I thought, like thinking about things. And he said, dieting activates the body's self-defense system. And I'd never heard of it put quite that way. And he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, the biological response to dieting is persistent, saturated with redundancies, and well focused on restoring the body's depleted energy reserves. And any weight loss strategy that does not plan for this is destined to fail, was basically what he said. I probably screwed up a little bit, but I pretty much know it by heart. So, I mean, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about 95% failure rate. Like it's a major problem. And like you look at the Biggest Loser study, that is absolutely petrifying because they put back on a lot of the weight they lost. And actually, if you look at their metabolic rate afterwards, it actually doesn't even go up. It stayed the same over 6 years, even though they put back on like 40 kilos. So, there is something there. And the question becomes, okay, if you lose weight and you keep it off, if you want to keep it off, what are your choices? Are they to be, on this reduced calorie amount indefinitely? Or there's some other strategies we can implement. So, but I just found it fascinating. Like my professor for when I did my graduate work was Dr. Donald Layman, and he was fabulous. Looking back, I got so lucky to be in his lab. He was a very brilliant guy, but he could answer things simply but with nuance. It was very impressive. But he would always challenge us, his grad students. There was only 3 of us that were in lab, and he would say, he would always ask why. Like, Layne, why do you think the body does this? Or why do you think this happens? So he would always approach it from like a teleological evolutionary perspective of what is the body trying to accomplish here. And it just, when McLean said that, dieting activates the body's self-defense system, it just like clicked something in my mind of, God, that makes so much sense. And I actually read a paper the other day. If you look at like leptin, for example, which is I'm sure you've spoke about it on your podcast previously. Mm-hmm. Leptin is kind of your body's body fat thermostat, for lack of a better term. Body fat goes up, leptin goes up, raises metabolic rate, lowers hunger, hopefully caps it off. Body weight goes down, body fat goes down, leptin goes down, lowers metabolic rate, that sort of thing. Hopefully trying to keep you in that homeostatic range. And it is very tightly controlled if you look at the data on body fat set point or settling point. So why do people become obese? Because, it does happen. We have a high obesity rate. Well, there's a lot of environmental factors as well as, food is easier to get. We're less active, those sorts of things. But one paper, I think it was called Weight Maintenance, What Goes Down Must Always Go Up, ? And they approached it from an interesting perspective, and that is over the last few thousand years, you're basically why would the body want to cap you in terms of getting too much body fat or too little body fat? Well, on the too little side, it's very obvious, starvation. The body doesn't want you to die, right? Doesn't want you to starve. On the high side, you're dealing with the risk of predation. So, tens of thousands a year ago, you got too fat. One, you couldn't catch food, but that's a self-limiting problem because if you can't catch food, you don't eat as much, you lose weight, and now you can catch food. But 2, you cannot escape a predator. Well, over the last, if you go back 100,000, 50,000, 100,000 years, that might have been just as big of a risk as, say, starvation. However, now, over the last, probably 10,000 years, that risk has gradually decreased much more. But, we're very spoiled in Western society. You don't really have to worry about starving to death. But up until even like in some parts of the world, that's still a big risk. But even up until 100 years ago in the United States, you still had to worry about starvation. You could literally starve to death. So what the body is weighing there are 2 different risks. And over the last 10,000 years, the risk of predation is relatively low, whereas the risk of starvation is relatively high. So it would make sense that the body would have a much more robust response to caloric restriction, which it would sense as famine. My friend Ben Escrow said something one time that I really liked. He said, dieting is nothing more than controlled starvation in terms of the responses that happen. And I think that's very true. So, every time you diet, and I think if you look at there's some interesting data on weight cycling, especially in rats now. Again, rats, people, but you can't do this sort of stuff in humans because it's too hard to control all these variables. But there was a study where they had rats weight cycles. So they took obese rats, they had them diet down. I forget how much weight they lost, but it was a significant amount. And then they had them relapse, diet down again, and relapse again. And what was crazy was the rate of weight loss the second time around was half of what it was the first time. Half. And we're talking about the same caloric restriction, or theoretically the same caloric restriction. They were on the same calories. It took them twice as long to lose the same amount of weight. That's incredible. Then when they came back up, when they regained the weight the second time around, they regained it 3 or 4 times faster. I'm not quite sure, but I know it's at least 3 times. 3 to 4 times faster than the first time. That's crazy. But if you look at what you're telling your body when you diet, and every time you diet, you're telling your body, this is a dose of starvation. It's a controlled dose, but it's a dose of starvation. It's famine. You're teaching your body that it needs to be thrifty with energy because you're telling it, hey, energy is scarce. The problem is when people say, well, what am I supposed to do? Because, we're supposed to restrict calories. That's going to, let us live longer, healthier lives, which, by the way, that data is actually very different in humans than it is in animals. It's not as clear cut as people make it out to be. But anyway, but that's why, if we go to, and just because it's my field, but the case studies of natural bodybuilders, if you look at the best coaches, they tell you don't compete every year because it's going to be, 1, it's going to be hard for you to grow muscle, but 2, it's going to be hard for you to get as lean because it takes time to recover your metabolic rate after your show and those sorts of things. So I just found all this stuff extremely interesting, and a lot of it's my theories. But like I said, that comment on the self-defense system, and we talked about this before the show started, by McLean, I just thought that was a brilliant way of looking at it. It really just changed my perspective on how I approached thinking about caloric restriction.
Very interesting. And like I mentioned to you before the show, regarding resting metabolic rate, because I've done several hundreds measurements the last 2 years, and what I actually see, which isn't surprising to be honest, combat sport athletes that frequently cut weight has really shitty resting metabolic rates.
Yeah.
And also some of the bikini fitness, I've had a couple of bikini fitness competitors that been competing 3-4 times a year, which had really low resting metabolic rate. And what I actually noticed, which I thought was really fascinating, that some of them even they even talk slower.
Yes.
Yeah, they even talk slower. It's everything is so slow moving, blinking slower.
I put out a DVD in 2010 of my contest prep there. I blink slower. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding you. Mm-hmm. I actually blink slower. That, people kind of dismiss NEAT because they say, oh, well, you could just move more. Mm-hmm. It's not that simple. It's really not, because NEAT, if you read the definition of NEAT, it's because if you're doing walking for NEAT, you're not actually doing NEAT. That's exercise. Mm-hmm. NEAT is stuff you do not even thinking about it. It's involuntary movement. So it's like when I get up and I do seminars, if I've been not dieting, I'm using my hands and I'm waving and I'm walking all over the place. If I'd been dieting for 6 months, I promise you I would not be moving nearly as much. It's not something people say, oh, well, just fidget more. No, because if I'm making myself fidget, then that is an active process. I'm actually having to think about that. Whereas normally if I'm fidgeting, I'm on my computer and I'm writing stuff and maybe my leg is fidgeting. That's completely involuntary. But if I make myself do that, now I can't focus on the task that I'm trying to do. It's you can't. Your brain actually can't do 2 voluntary tasks at one time. It's a single thing. You just switch back and forth really quickly. So if I'm having to think about tapping my leg as I get into answering my emails, I'm just going to stop doing it. Mm-hmm. Because it's not an involuntary task. And so people kind of dismiss NEAT. And I know, we talked about Lyle McDonald beforehand, he makes he kind of, his big criticism of me was always, well, metabolic adaptation only accounts for 15% of the decrease in caloric expenditure, or that it's only 15% drop, I think is his thing, in terms of BMR. Okay, well, that may only be 15% for most people, but NEAT is enormously modifiable, and you can't just dismiss it, because that is a huge thing. That is a huge way that the body dissipates excess energy. And even but we know that 15% isn't true either, because if you look at the Biggest Loser study, I think it was closer to like 25 or 30%. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at Dr. Chris Foss at University of Oklahoma, when he was doing his PhD, I actually prepped him for a show, and we looked at his. They published a case study on this. I think it was his wife, Lindy Rousseau. Also, Jeremy Lineker was on the paper. And Chris is a big guy. Chris is about, I think he would be about 185 pounds of lean body mass, like a good amount of lean body mass. And at the beginning, when he started, his metabolic rate was actually higher than you would predict by a little bit. It was like 2,400 BMR. By the end of his prep, 6 months later, it was 1285. Mm-hmm. 1285 on a guy who has 185 pounds of lean body mass. And it corresponded to, I think it was like a 33% drop in basal metabolic rate. So I think if you look at a number like 15%, I think that that's probably right for most people, for the average person that you would get in a study, that you don't starve, because you can't do that with an IRB. But I think if you look, when you've actually worked with people and you understand that, yes, a lot of people underreport, but not everybody lies. A lot of people don't lie. In fact, when you're working with a competitor population, you're working with a population that would probably actually, like, literally eat dirt if you told them to eat dirt. Mm-hmm. And there was there was a study referenced. I need to actually go look it up. In the study I talked about, that was what goes down must always go up. That was a review. And they cited several case studies of people maintaining their body weight on less than 1,000 calories a day. So I'd have to go through and look at those case studies and see how tightly controlled they were, because obviously somebody can say that and then not be true. But there was a metabolic ward study where they took women who said that they had trouble losing fat, that they thought they had slow metabolisms. And people actually use this paper against me, but I kind of, when you actually go through and look at the data, they found that of the people who said that, when they put them on 1,500 calories in the metabolic ward for a month, I think it was a month, and over half the women lost weight. They're probably underreporting. But another half didn't lose weight on 1,500 calories, and one person actually gained weight. So I'm more interested in the one person, right? Because how the fuck are they gaining weight? Pardon me, can I curse?
Yeah.
How the hell are they gaining weight on 1,500 calories a day? You know? So that is extremely interesting to me. And I look at that as the body is going to bring out a response in terms of its self-defense system that is proportionate to the level of insult that it's incurring, or the energy gap that it's incurring. So if you're talking about people who have gone on kind of yo-yo dieting for years with really restrictive diets, I'm not surprised that you've got some people who can maintain their body weight on very low calories, but also have more body fat than most. Because if you look at the research data, when you regain body weight after a diet, especially yo-yo dieting or weight cycling as they call it, you regain almost exclusively fat mass initially. And then lean body mass takes much, much longer to come back. But it does come back. And when it comes back, when it gets back to its original level, that tends to be when weight gain stops, or body fat gain stops. There's a theory out there that you have adipostats and protein stats in your body that kind of regulate this. Well, if you're somebody, and this has been my experience with not just competitors, but also the average person. A lot of the average people, or non-competitors, will do a diet, get ready for whatever they're getting ready for, a wedding, vacation, whatever, get to it, and then they put on 10 pounds really, really quickly, or whatever amount of weight, which is almost exclusively body fat. And then they immediately start trying to diet back down again because, hey, I don't want to be this fat, right? But your metabolic rate has not had sufficient time to catch back up. Like what it takes to regain your metabolic rate is going to take much longer and is more sluggish. So if you kind of keep following that, you can think about somebody who's done that, because I know people who have done this 4, 5, 6, 7 times throughout the course of, over years. And every time you're doing that, you're telling your body, food is scarce, food is scarce, food is scarce. We must conserve. And that was where I kind of came up with, for my new book, shameless plug, the idea of a 3-pronged approach that the body uses to as the self-defense system. The first prong being metabolic adaptation, so slowing down your metabolic rate as you diet. The second prong being what I couldn't really come up with a good word for it, but I call it prevent phase, which is basically while you're still dieting, your body's already upregulating systems that will enable you to store more body fat. So you get more metabolically efficient. You're actually decreasing fat oxidation within the adipocyte, and you're increasing the expression of enzymes that are lipogenic. So your body is preparing, but it makes complete perfect sense if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, because if you were in famine and you came across a large amount of food, your body would want to capture as much of that as you possibly could, because it would not make sense to have a still elevated inefficient metabolism. You'd want to capture as much of that potential ATP as you could and store it. So it makes perfect sense as to why your body would set you up for massive fat regain to restore that energy gap. And then the final prong is basically the idea that your body, after you've been through these cycles of dieting, that your body can actually make it harder for you to lose fat in the future. And that's some of the stuff we talked about with probably the most interesting research I saw from McLean's lab, where they actually showed that it's possible to increase your fat cell number if you gain weight too rapidly in the post-diet setting. It's very interesting because the idea of fat cell hyperplasia is not unknown. We've known for a while that if you get big enough, if you get obese enough, your body will have to produce more fat cells. It's very interesting the history of adipose tissue and the way it's viewed, but we just used to look at it kind of the same way we did muscle. We used to say it just sits there, and if you eat too much, it takes it up, and if you don't eat enough, it lets some energy out. And now we know that like fat tissue, adipose, is an organ. It secretes hormones. It integrates hormonal signals. It talks to the brain. It talks to other tissues, the liver, muscle. And it's also having turnover. You're always having fat cell turnover. So it's about 8 years, I think, is the life cycle of a fat cell. So you're always having new fat cells created and having old fat cells destroyed. But in the post-diet setting, where thyroid is low, leptin is low, insulin is low, it almost apparently creates this. And also when you diet, another thing McLean talked about was that your extracellular matrix, when you if you ever seen information on what do they call it, liposuction, when they take fat out, it doesn't go back there. The people, when they regain fat, they regain it in weird places because you destroy the extracellular matrix of that area. So when you diet, McLean showed that you actually place a stress on the extracellular matrix that actually favors regaining that body fat, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So you've got all these different things happening. And if they had a study where they showed that if you gained body fat back too quickly, that you could actually create new fat cells, that you could convert pre-adipocytes to fully formed adipocytes. And I think if I try to think about, and this is just completely me going out on a limb, but if I try to think about why the body would do this, probably because if you're having such a rapid influx of fat, and fat cells only like to be about 100 microns. That's about the max that they can get diameter-wise. If your body senses that they're rapidly expanding, it may trigger this pre-differentiation. Again, I'm going out on a limb, but it may trigger this pre-adipocyte differentiation because it is afraid that it won't be able to capture all that energy, that it's going to max out the cell size too quickly, and it will lose some of that energy. So it creates new fat cells, even though you're not back, even though those other fat cells aren't at their max volume yet. So anyways, it's extremely like I've gotten so it was funny because I did my PhD in protein metabolism, but now I find adipose way more fascinating than muscle tissue. But yeah, it's just I tell people I'm like people kind of take dieting lightly, but if you do it incorrectly, it can mess you up pretty good, and you end up with people like you who you have a competitor who has a BMR of 900 calories per day. I mean that's crazy for somebody who has less lean body mass. But if you put them into like a Mueller equation or a Harris-Benedict or something like that, she probably comes out at like, 13, 14, 1,500 calories is what should be her BMR. Mm-hmm. And it's just incredible.
Yeah, I think it actually was like spot on what you said there. Approximately 500 something below what was predicted in this case. But it's really interesting what you're saying about the fat cells, because the old theory was that it was almost like predetermined how many fat cells you had. Like they increased until you were done with puberty, and then after that nothing changed. But your theory on that is really interesting, and it also, like you said, it really makes sense in the way you explained it.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but I mean, I could always be wrong too.
Yeah, but like you said, it makes sense. And what's fascinating for me is that, like, knowing all this, like what the body does when you're trying to lose weight and all these adaptations that occur and all these self-defense mechanisms that body work, it's almost like you should never get obese and you should never die. That's probably the best thing you should probably do.
Once you have become obese, your road to get back from that is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And there are many factors that are going to be not on your side. And what I tell obese people is be okay with the idea that you're never going to be really lean, but you could be very healthy. So if you exercise and you lose 5 to 10% of your body weight and keep it off, almost all the health benefits from weight loss are in the first 10%. So I'll have people who will message me and they're like, I've lost 100 pounds, this and that. I've got another 100 to go. And I say, okay, the first thing is focus on maintaining the 100 you lost. Okay. If you never get that other 100, guess what? You've probably gotten all the health benefits from this. So now it's a vanity thing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with vanity. We all like to look good. I get it. But, if you want a perfect example of like metabolic adaptation in the self-defense system, just look at people who have bariatric surgery, who can eat more than 1,200 calories a day or 1,500 calories a day. Show me one person who's had bariatric surgery who becomes very lean. Mm-hmm. I have yet to see one person who becomes very lean, because eventually their body adapts to that calorie level and they stop losing weight. Now they lose a lot of weight. Like if you're, 300 pounds and you have bariatric surgery, you might lose 100, 120 pounds, but you're probably never going to be an elite bikini competitor or an elite bodybuilder or whatever, somebody who gets to very low levels of body fat, because you're capping your body's ability to burn through fuel, because you can only consume so much during the day.
Absolutely. And I'm going a bit off topic here, but I want to hear your recommendation on this or your thought process. I've had females approach me who clearly have like 80, 90, 100 pounds to lose and want to compete in bikini. And I try to stress to them that I'm not sure this is the best idea in your case, because I think the price you're going to pay for your health by losing that much is going to have a negative effect on your health. What's your thought about that?
It's difficult because some people, they need that sort of kind of carrot on the end of a stick to get them motivated to do something. Mm-hmm. But I have seen competition absolutely ruin people. I mean, ruin people, like ruin their lives. But probably that's one of those things where I sit down and have a conversation with somebody and say, hey, listen, I get why you want to do this, but you also need to think about, the long term. Don't sacrifice what you want most for what you want right now. There was actually a study done about this very topic. they did a study on what's called recency. And recency is basically a measure of how much you value information in close proximity to you versus further out. It's not the same thing as delayed gratification, but for our purposes, it's essentially the same thing. So they found that people with low recency, in that they didn't need data, they didn't need stuff right in front of them to get motivated or to be disciplined. People with low recency, very high correlation to success, not just in dieting, but just in general. It's kind of like did you ever hear the marshmallow experiment? You ever heard of that in kids?
No.
So they took this fabulous psychological experiment. I think they were 5 years old. They took kids who were 5 years old, put them in a room, and they put one marshmallow in front of them. They said, "You got one marshmallow right now. If you don't eat it, when we come back, you will get another one. We're not going to tell you when we're coming back, but if you wait, you will get another one. Or you can have the one right now and you won't get another one." And the kids who waited had an extremely high correlation to success later in life, whereas the kids who did not had a low correlation to success later in life. So basically, how much can you value the knowledge of what may happen in the future that you don't have right now? But how much can you value that knowledge? So people who had low recency means you value information further out, have very high success rates in dieting. And actually, what's interesting, people make a big deal about the type of diet to lose weight. And if they only knew the research data, the type of diet you use, there is no diet that's correlated with success in more than any other. Like keto versus Weight Watchers versus whatever. The only correlation is people who do well tend to eat a little bit more protein, a little bit more fiber. That's the only, but as far as individual diets, there's nothing that seems to be better than another thing. And that's because it's behavior that makes the difference. Mm-hmm. It's the one thing that is always associated with success is adherence. Mm-hmm. Adherence. So, but the problem is that people, they say, well, I get, especially, and I have my own theories as by why women suffer from this more, but especially with women, I get a lot of women who say, well, if I just could lose this 10 pounds right now, I would be fine. And then we could start working on this. I said, no. That mentality of needing to lose it right now is exactly why you're in the situation that you're in. Mm-hmm. And if you want a different outcome, because guess what? You've been trying to lose the same 10 pounds for 5 years. So if you want a different outcome, you've got to change your approach. You've got to completely change your mindset, and that's difficult because I think especially for women, because, they're told from a young age about diet and not being too fat or calling themselves fat. I really, when I give seminars, I emphasize to like mothers, especially, like if you call yourself fat in front of your daughter, she will have an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. Like you will give your daughter an eating disorder 100%. Like you cannot talk that way. But I think, I feel bad for women because they just have such pressure on them from a young age to diet. And I even like people who are in great shape, who look great. It's almost like a comfort thing. They have to like, if they can't talk about being on a diet, it's almost like they want to fit in a comfort thing. It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. We've talked a lot about why diets fail and how horrible the statistics are on people not being able to keep the weight off. And like you said, the problem is not losing the weight. The problem is losing the weight and keeping it off. So you mentioned that 95% of people fail with that with their approach. So that means that 5% actually are successful. So the question is, what are these 5% doing differently than the others to be successful?
So they do a lot of things very differently. The first thing is they adopt a lifestyle. They don't look at it as a diet. They don't look at it as, okay, this has an endpoint, right? So I'm doing this 12-week challenge, or I'm doing this, or like they understand that the behavior that they had to incorporate to lose the weight, they will need to have that same behavior to keep it off. And that's why I always tell people, if the diet you're on, if you can't see yourself being on it in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, then you've got to rethink your plan, because it's going to fail. I saw something, well, I'm just doing keto now to lose the weight. And then no, stop. Keto's fine as long as you understand that is going to be a lifestyle from you from here on out. But if you can't do that, then you've got to change your plan. It's going to fail. So one of the things we really emphasize a lot in the book is, hey, here's a strategy, here's a strategy, here's a strategy, but it may not be the right strategy for you. Okay? This group of people got, this with this. Like, for example, high protein. High protein seems to be associated with better responses to weight maintenance and weight loss. But if you hate eating protein, or if you're a vegan and you don't get that much in, if it's not a sustainable lifestyle for you to eat that much protein, then you've got to come up with something different, because adherence and sustainability is the number one thing above everything else. So picking something that can fit your lifestyle and work. That's what, I don't think intermittent fasting is magic. Oh, sorry, Martin. He gets very angry at me when I say it's not magic. But it's not magic. But that doesn't mean that for some people it's not helpful. Now, there are some interesting data about intermittent fasting and insulin sensitivity that might be a little bit better for insulin sensitivity. But if you look at the research data on the whole, in terms of where do the benefits come from dieting, it is upwards of 95% of the benefits from dieting are purely from the weight loss. If you look at studies on blood lipids, blood sugar, all these sorts of things, the weight loss explains 95% of it. And in one study that explained, in one meta-analysis, they concluded it was about 100% of it. Mm-hmm. So we have to focus on how can we get the weight off. And then if we do that, then maybe we can mess around with some of these other things like intermittent fasting for improved insulin sensitivity, that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is, if you get the weight off and keep it off, you're healthy. Like people like to go back and forth in these little tiny things about, well, keeping insulin low or improving insulin sensitivity or this LDL particle. And I sit over here and I'm like, guys, they can't. I see two experts arguing like, guys, they can't stick to either one of your diets. Like, it doesn't even matter, because they're just going to go back to doing what they did before. Mm-hmm. So that was where, like, with flexible dieting, for me, that was a huge game changer, because for me, I'm like, well, I could do this forever, because if you're telling me I can still have my ice cream here and there, cool, we're good, But for some people, flexible dieting isn't the right lifestyle, right? The counting and the perfectionism and the OCD, like the numbers give them stress. So for them, maybe they've got to find a different way to restrict calories. And so we go through this a lot in the book, but in general, there was a Framingham study. It was like back in 2000, I think it was, where they polled dieters who had success. And a few things popped up. The first thing was successful people, very high rate of practicing cognitive self-restraint. So whether that's calorie counting, whether it's intermittent fasting, cutting carbs, whatever, they're using some form of restraint, or they're like, I'm not eating after 6 p.m. or they're finding some way to create a deficit, right? The other one is they self-monitor. They tend to weigh daily. They weigh themselves daily. Some people, again, we say in the book, hey, but if weighing daily makes you stress the frick out and it makes you can't, well, then maybe you weigh once a week, or maybe you have your significant other look at the scale weight, tally the total for the week and give you an average or something like that. There's different strategies we give to use, but they tend to self-monitor. They exercise. That's a huge one. I mean, that's probably like a duh thing. But of people who lose weight and keep it off, over 70% exercise. Of people who lose weight and don't keep it off, less than 30% exercise. If you want to do I'm sure I don't have to sell anybody who's listening to your podcast on this, but if you want to do one thing, there's only really one thing in the world besides losing weight and besides drugs that can instantly improve, not instantly, but within a few weeks' time, improve your health dramatically, and not just your physical health, but your mental health as well, it's exercise. That's it. That is, I know it's cliche to say exercise is a drug, movement is medicine, but it is true. Like it just is. And it also, interestingly, it's the only thing you can do that will actually lower your set point that the body defends. They've shown this in several studies that if you exercise and continuously, it will lower the set point that your body will defend. So boom, you've already set yourself up for success right there, right? So they exercise. Interestingly, support had divergent results. So people who were supported by other people who were participating in a diet or giving them positive feedback saying you look great, this sort of thing, they were highly correlated with success. But people who supported by instructive mechanisms, so kind of, well, you should try this or maybe do this, that was actually associated with lower levels of success. So again, now this is just correlation data, so who knows? But the other thing is they don't do quick fixes. That's what the other 5% don't do. They don't do quick fixes. They have they delay gratification, and they don't really do. They don't believe weight loss supplements are going to help them, and they don't really do much fad dieting. So those are the big ones. Which there's nothing ground earth shaking, but we kind of lay it out in a way that's a little bit easier to digest and puts all the data out there for people, because I think a lot of people don't even think about this kind of stuff. They hop from diet to diet, and they're just waiting for that magic diet to fix everything for them. And sometimes, like, this is why people become so zealous about certain diets. Somebody will stumble upon low carb, high fat, and for whatever reason, it just clicks with them, right? Like that diet clicked with them. They didn't feel hungry. They could sustain it. And so, but then bros make the mistake of something works for them, and so they think everybody should do it. Scientists and researchers make the mistake that because something worked best for the average, that the individual should do that, and that's also inappropriate. So I think what needs to happen is we need to lay out, okay, these are the behaviors you're going to have to adopt, and here are your options, right? Here are some techniques that we know can work. Will they work for you? Maybe, maybe not, but here they are. And that's kind of what we did in the book. So, people are waiting for an obesity cure or something to happen. I don't think there's going to be an obesity cure. I think it's really convincing people that it's going to be hard, and you're going to have to be consistent with it. It's just, the same reason that there's not a lot of wealthy people in the world or people who acquire wealth, because it's hard. I mean, some people get lucky and hit the lottery, and some people have an investment that hits or whatever. But for the most part, people who amass, a good amount of wealth in their life, it's because they were very consistent with saving, and they didn't waste a bunch of money, and they made good, smart investments. Dieting is not all that dissimilar. People who have success make a good investment in terms of the approaches they choose. They're consistent. And they don't look at the short term. They look at what am I doing right now? Is that going to get me closer to my goal? Because if what I'm doing right now sidetracks me from my goal, it doesn't happen. And that's another thing. It's kind of another way of putting it, but that is something that's very, very apparent in the 5% of people who are successful, is they focus on their goal, and anything that's going to sidetrack them from that, they don't mess with it. So those are kind of the techniques that tend to work. But a lot of those are personality traits and character traits. So now you can build character traits, you can, but it's difficult to get people to change their behaviors. That's tough, So how do we fix it? I think informing people and really continuing to really emphasize that fads are not the way. But it's so hard. It's so hard because you got people like me, Eric, Mike Israetel, James Krieger. When we speak at conferences or whatever, you'll hear us. We say, well, maybe this thing matters, but only with this, and we're not sure. And to the person who's not educated, you just sound unconfident. Whereas you got this guy over here on YouTube. He's like, the three most important things for weight loss are cutting carbs, eating organic, and and it's like, whoa, wow, well that is a much more palatable answer and sounds sexier, so people go with it.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough to fight against.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. Funny thing is that national TV contacted me a few weeks ago, wanting me to be part of some sort of a panel on live TV discussing the optimal way of training, the optimal way of nutrition,
God,
and the first thing they
let me
asked
let me know when you figure it out.
yeah. So the first question they asked me is, how should we eat? Like, what's the best nutrition approach? How should we train? What's the best training approach? I'm like, the first answer I asked them is like, for what? Like, training for what? What's your goal? And the funny thing is that the reason why they wanted to do this show was because there was so much confusion amongst people that they wanted to have a live session where they had brought in experts and where everyone agreed on this is the universal approach that fits for everyone's lifestyle and everyone's goal. So to make a long story short, I basically refused to be on that show because I couldn't participate in such a stupid concept, to be honest, because I knew that I wouldn't necessarily get the platform that I wanted to talk what I wanted to talk about, and I felt that they wanted to steer it in that direction, that you had to be forced to give a universal answer. So it's difficult. But back on the thing that you mentioned about these 5% that have this success rate, to summarize it, it's basically that they lose the weight and they have tools and strategies to maintain what they did to actually reach that destination. But one of the questions that people often ask is, let's say your goal is to lose, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds. And when you've lost that, what should you do after that? Like, if you just want to maintain that weight, or let's say you want to do even more, like you want to do that as your first goal, and then you have a second goal, maybe losing 5 or 10 more. What should you do in that transition phase, if you can call that?
Yeah, great question. So I'm sorry I had to take my earphones out because my phone was dying.
No
so
worries.
I had to plug it. Hopefully the audio is still okay.
Yeah.
So you basically have two options, really. You can, stay at a maintenance calorie level where you'll maintain your weight. And if you're happy with how you look and you're happy with your nutritional intake, then hit maintenance and done. But if you're somebody who, either you want to get lower and you kind of feel like you've kind of maxed out or capped out how low you want to go on calories and gone as high as you can on activity, and or you're somebody you've reached your goal, but you're not happy with your calorie intake, you don't feel like it's a sustainable thing. I mean, this was where I didn't come up with the concept; it had been out there before. But the idea of reverse dieting, and adding calories in a slow, controlled manner to hopefully limit body fat regain, but restore metabolic rate. There's people out there who will say Layne's a shyster because he talks about this stuff, or there's no PubMed citations, and there's not. There's really not. But I just know from my experience of working with clients that I've seen people have success with this. Now, not everybody has the same level of success, but I've seen people who I do think the kinetics of adding in calories matter. And I don't, again, perhaps it's a threshold where if you're going at a certain pace, your NEAT or BMR or whatever is ramping up at the same level as the calories you're increasing by. And therefore you're able to, because I've seen people do things I just couldn't explain. And I couldn't explain it through their activity level either. I had a guy who, he entered a contest prep on like 175 grams of carbs a day and like 60 grams of fat. And we got him up to 420 grams of carbohydrate and about 80 grams of fat, and he lost weight during that time. And this was over about a 16-week period. And his activity actually went down Like he actually did less activity. Now, people will hear that, and you'll have guys like Lyle or whoever will say, well, Layne's saying people will violate the laws of thermodynamics. That's not what I'm saying. Energy balance is going to determine weight loss or weight gain. What I'm saying is there's something happening that we don't quite understand that in that case that's causing energy balance to tip towards expenditure, where there's being more expenditure. And not everybody responds that way. People are very differential. I've had some people where I do the same sort of thing, and they just kind of slowly, linearly gain weight. But typically what I will say is that if you do a slow, controlled increase, even if you add weight, when you go to come back down, you're better off than if you just let yourself blow back up. Like that seems to be very clear amongst the clients I've worked with over the years. But it's just, it's probably going to take years. I know that there's somebody who I've talked with who is actually looking to do an actual reverse dieting study. And they wanted to do kind of a, this is where it gets interesting because Eric kind of promotes the recovery diet, which is, and I've heard this from several people like Eric and Alan. They say, well, go back to maintenance. And my question to them is always, okay, what maintenance are we talking about? Are we talking about people's actual maintenance when they end a diet? Because if we're talking about actual maintenance, then we're not disagreeing on anything. Like, I think they should go to actual maintenance. But if we're talking about their predicted maintenance, like, for example, in the case of the girl who had the BMR of 900, if her predicted maintenance is 1,800 calories, she's going to gain weight if we put her on that, right? But if you say, well, her actual maintenance is probably closer to 1,200, well, then she can maintain her weight on that. And then, so I'll recommend people kind of after a diet, they go to maintenance, and then they slowly start adding in calories from there. Now, there's no wrong way to do it. I have a conversation with a client, and they say, hey, I'm really low energy, my libido is really low, I feel terrible, I think about food all the time. I'm okay with regaining some body fat if I can feel better faster. Hey, cool, no problem. Here, boom, 30%, 40% calories, let's go up, right? Because at the end of the day, I just want my clients to be happy. I don't really care if they're shredded or not. Like, if they're happy with a little bit extra body fat, that's fine with me. So I think it really has to be a discussion, between a coach and a client. Now, as far as people out there and what they actually do, I do think that there are things we can learn and techniques we can institute. I talk about it in the book, shameless plug, of, hey, based on where you're at right now, what's the best move for you, right? So in the case of the girl that I'm going to bring her up again. What if you had BMR'd her, and was she without giving away too much information about her, was she very lean, or was she average body fat, or was she more body fat?
I would say not stage lean, but
leaner than average.
Leaner than average, yeah.
Okay, but what if that person was somebody who was had a little bit more body fat than average, right? And so they've got this low metabolic rate. They've got more body fat than they'd like to have, and they want to lose that. Well, what do you tell them? Okay, well, here's 800 calories. Have fun. Well, that's not going to be sustainable. that's not going to work for most people. So, like, I kind of tell people if they want to criticize reverse dieting, I say, well, what other option do you really kind of have at that point? Like, the idea is being, okay, well, let's restore the metabolic rate. I look at it as like, what are you telling your body? Okay, well, now you're telling your body, hey, we're not in famine anymore. We've got more calories. We can afford to be a little bit more dissipatory. We can dissipate more calories. And it's going to put you in a better position when you choose in the future to go into caloric deficit. I actually had a very interesting, this is why this stuff is like, it's so, research only tells you so much. And then working with individuals tells you so much more in certain ways. I had a gal who I reversed her very slowly, and she started at, I just remember carbon fat intakes. She started at, I actually just looked at her data last night. She started at 1,260 calories. And over 6 months, we took her from 1,260 to, I want to say, 1,860. That 600 calorie increase, she gained 28 pounds. Okay. Now, some people would say, why the heck did you do that? it was bad for her. Well, she had told me, she's like, I can't live like this. So now, what's really interesting is from 1800 to 2500, she has not gained a single pound. Mm-hmm. Her weight has completely stabilized. And I see that a lot with people is there are thresholds in metabolism where, you know, you like, and anybody who's like lost or gained weight and paid attention knows this too, that there's weight loss is usually not like a linear thing, and weight gain is usually, it's not like a stair step, you know, like you'll be stuck and then boom, you'll drop like a kilo, right? And then you'll get stuck again, or it'll slow down. You know, it's just, we don't have good ways to explain that sort of stuff, you know? And I just think, the more I know, the more I don't know. I really hope a lot of these things get answered here in the next 10, 15 years, because I just find it so fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I hope so too, to say the least. So let's wrap this podcast up with a take-home message to the listeners.
Sorry, I went off on so many tangents. You know, you were like, we're gonna have a very focused message. So I'm like, oh, he hasn't been around me very much. I like to go down the rabbit hole. But yes, a take-home message for people who, you mean people who are dieting or want to maintain weight loss, that sort of thing?
Yeah, let's, like, based on the topic that we've talked today, like just summarizing why diets fail, what successful people are actually doing, and some strategies, like your most recommended strategies to lose the weight and maintain that weight loss.
So the first thing I will say is, if you do what you've always done, you are going to get what you've always gotten. So if you want a different result, you got to try something different. And so the biggest things I would tell people is value your long-term goal the most, way over any short-term goal. There's always going to be another event, photo shoot, show, wedding, vacation, whatever. This is for the rest of your life, right? You're trying to attain something for life. Focus on that more than any other short-term thing. Find what works for you in terms of creating a calorie deficit that you can adhere to, that fits your lifestyle and allows you, that is the minimum level of restriction on your lifestyle. For me, the minimum level of restriction on my lifestyle is tracking my macros and allowing myself flexibility in my food choices. It does not bother me to have to sit down and figure out what I ate. That doesn't bother me. It takes me maybe 5-10 minutes a day. It would bother me to just have to eat clean, or not eat carbs, or whatever it is. But if for somebody else it might be, hey, I don't like that. I want to just do ketogenic. Fine. If that allows you to create a calorie deficit, that's fine. Whatever allows you to create a calorie deficit in a sustainable, maintainable way for your lifestyle that you can sustain, that is going to be the best diet for you. The best diet for you is probably the one you can stick to, okay? Not the one that looks perfect on paper. We don't live in dreamland, because at the end of the day, people don't fail diets when everything in life is going good and they have structure and balance and there's very little stress. No, people fail diets when they're going through a breakup and they're having stress at their job and they're busy and their kids are driving them nuts. That's when people fail. So you don't want something that requires the maximum amount of willpower from you, because when those sort of times hit, you're going to fail. You want something that requires the least amount of willpower and restriction on your lifestyle. So whatever that is for you. And then understanding that you have to maintain those sorts of behaviors indefinitely. I'll tell you one more story. When I went out to visit Sohee Lee and Brett Contreras when they were living in Phoenix, I stayed with them for a couple days. And Sohee says that she always observes people's eating behavior. She finds it fascinating. And she said, you know what was interesting about you, Layne, was you by default always picked low-calorie options. So you picked egg whites instead of eggs. Not that there's anything wrong with a whole egg. I don't want whole eggers getting crazy. There's nothing wrong with that. But I picked egg whites. I used low-fat butter spray. I use Splenda in my coffee. Now, why would I do that? I have enough calories that I can incorporate all those things in there. Well, and this is her other point. She's like, he also never turned down any food, right? So he made banana bread. I didn't turn it down. I said, sure, I'll have some banana bread. We went out to dinner. Everybody was having a drink. I had a beer, So I never, by choosing those lower calorie options by default, that is a habit of mine. I do that by default, even when my calories are really high, because then it gives me the flexibility to have stuff that I like to have and have fun. So for me, that is something that I've found to be useful. And people who sustain weight loss also tend to choose, that's one I forgot, they tend to choose low calorie options. They tend to eat lower fat, those sorts of things. So it's not magic, but you just develop habits that allow you to be successful.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Layne. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and I think me and the listeners really enjoyed the talk that we had today. Where can people find more information about you, and when is your book coming out?
Yeah, so the best place is to follow me on social media. Anything I'm going to do, I'm going to post on social media. My website, BioLayne.com, that's kind of like the central hub of everything I do. And the book, I already have a contest prep guide that's out for competitors, and that's going to be great for them. If you want to get ready for a show, like it's a 320-page, like literally a guide that's wonderful. And you can get that at BioLayneStore.com. And the new book, Fat Loss Forever, I actually just finished I have one chapter left to write. I anticipate the writing will get done this week. So I'm anticipating a launch of about 6 weeks. I think 6 weeks we'll have it ready to go. So we've already taken pre-orders for that, which went phenomenally. I could not be more stoked. This is like my fat loss manifesto. And, for people that order these, and they found this out with the contest prep guide, same thing with like Eric's ebooks. Like we update it for free. Like when we update it, we send it out to everybody who bought the first one. So you never have to buy another version, right? Mm-hmm. So like with the contest prep guide, we just released version 2, and we added 60 or 55 pages to the original, and we didn't charge people a dime who had already bought it. So that's one great thing about ebooks is you can update it and you don't have to charge anybody any extra. So obviously I'm biased. I think my stuff's pretty good. But the feedback on the prep guide has been amazing. We've sold over 7,000 copies, and people have really, really liked it. And I think we've only literally gotten one negative feedback on 7,000 copies. So I'm very, very happy. And I wish I had done this kind of writing years ago.
Awesome. I'll link everything in the description for people to check out. And if the new book is as good as the prep book, I think people have something to look forward to. I'm really impressed with the thing you've done with the prep book, and I've recommended to several of the coaches. Yeah, I've read it. When did you launch the book again? It was.
So we did a pre-order in early February, and we launched it in early March.
Yeah, so I think I was on a plane to Switzerland in May, and I've purchased the book, but I didn't get a chance to read it until I was on the plane. But I really enjoyed the book, especially the topic where you talk about all these adaptations that do occur during the diets. So it's a highly recommended book on my end to people that also coach clients, because I think they provide a lot of value.
Well, that's why I told people, I say, if you're a coach, this is a great reference guide for you. And I'll go ahead, I'll give your podcast a little special announcement. We will have hardback, actual print books available here in the next few months. So we're actually getting it made, and it's going to be made like a textbook. Mm-hmm. So like an actual reference guide, because so many coaches told me, hey, are you ever going to print this? Because I would love to have this as just a reference guide at a show, just to flip through, And I think that's great. Like people say, oh, doesn't that bother you that people take your information to coach other people? No, of course not. Like I want good information to be out there. So yeah, like we're going to be releasing an actual paperback version of the book here within a few months. So I think people are really going to be excited about that and enjoy that. It will be pretty pricey just because it's really expensive to print, especially when you're self-publishing. But I think a lot of people will really enjoy it. So yeah, I'm really excited about, like, that's the, like, of all the things I've done, like, business-wise, that's like my most proud, I think, thing I've ever been proud of, just because we wrote it in like 8 weeks, I want to say. Like, we just sat down and I just got so into it. And every time I would come to something and say, should I include it? Yeah, we'll include it, you know? So like all the case studies, all that stuff, I think it's just a really, really well done guide that fuses together science, evidence-based stuff with also this is what worked practically from my experience. And I think it does a good job of marrying those two without letting one take over versus the other.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to your new book. And once again, Layne, thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.